Oh, how's it going, everybody? I guess this is kind of like a cross promote. It's like a cross pollination of what do you call it? What do I call it? Ride or Die, America's most dangerous and provocative vlogging series, and my normal movie reviews. So I'm sitting here waiting to pick up my kid in Caroline, and I was thinking about the movie *Malignant*. It just came out last week. I think on the 10th. September 10th. Directed by James Wan. I believe it's written by James Wan. It stars a bunch of people that I was not very familiar with. Television actor types, save for the lead, maybe. I think the lead actress, pretty good. Pretty okay. So yeah, James Wan. James Wan. He's like kind of considered, he's like the horror master of the current times, of the modern era. You know, he got famous directing the first Saw movie and then being a producer on that series. And then he kind of, pivoted into other things, but he's mainly known for mostly horror, like genre stuff, and kind of a return to formal horror. If people remember when The Conjuring came out years ago, was it like 2012, 2013? It was kind of a big deal, because it was the return to like a traditional haunted house kind of spooky movie. And people hadn't seen that in a really long time. So it was cool. It was like, and even I felt the same way. I remember being like, oh, this is awesome. It's like watching like The Changeling or something. A George C. Scott flick. Can't remember the director right now. But so that's kind of always been his bag. And he's kind of continued on with that in terms of even with the further Conjuring movies. Then he kind of became big Hollywood man, which just happens to all these guys. They get the big budgets. He does a Fast and Furious movie, I think. Didn't he do Fast and Furious 7? Is that him? I think it was James Wan. I'm pretty sure it was. He did Fast and Furious 7, and then he did Aquaman. Which, actually, I don't hate Aquaman. Of all the cape shit, the superhero movies, Aquaman is so fucking stupid. And it really just kind of leans into how stupid it is that I kind of liked it in some ways. But yeah, so he was, he made this very successful movies for studios. So they gave him kind of a blank check that said, hey man, or not a blank check. Not that, pretty modestly budgeted movie. But they just kind of let him do whatever he wanted. And that's clearly what *Malignant* is. *Malignant* is not a movie that like a studio looking to like create the next big hit makes. It's totally potentially could have. And I think if this had maybe come out in a different time, it would have been more successful because I think it did not do very well in theaters. But it was, also day and date on HBO Max, and it did seem like it did pretty okay. A lot of people talking about *Malignant*. It was definitely out in the zeitgeist over the weekend. People are still talking about it as they're discovering it on HBO Max. And in some ways, like, it kind of proves that some movies are maybe just better suited for HBO Max. So if they wanted to do like bring the mid-budget movies back, and that's kind of where they would premiere on HBO Max, it'd probably be a happy medium for a lot of people. I mean, it's the same thing like Netflix is doing. Like, those are a lot of like kind of mid-level, mid-budget movies. They're usually not very good. They're kind of the dumping grounds for a lot of stuff, and they buy a ton of shit from all over the world. But HBO Max has an opportunity, I think, to maybe do a little bit higher caliber. It's just kind of in the way HBO was always known for being, like, with television shows and stuff. They would have the prestige television. That entire notion kind of starts on HBO with stuff like Oz or The Sopranos, The Wire, all that kind of stuff. But anyways, this is neither here nor there. So *Malignant*. *Malignant* is a very James Wan movie. If you are familiar with James Wan's filmography, especially his horror stuff, kind of going all the way back to like Dead Silence. He did a Killer Doll movie. It was, I think, what he did right after. I want to say he did that like right after Saw. Because it has that same kind of vibe, that same kind of spirit. And he really kind of just goes for it here. He really goes balls to the wall and completely commits to the premise, which was nice to see. Because a lot of times, there was like a period of time, like the late 90s and early 2000s, where all these kind of movies that you thought some really crazy shit was happening, they would always hedge their bets and be like, well, it's like in their mind. It's like psychological. Well, while that's partially true here, I don't want to give it away. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to say too much. It is a fun ride. I will say just broadly, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for what it was. I kind of expected something like some trashy horror movie, and that's exactly what I got. And I enjoyed that. And the more dumb it got, the more ludicrous it got, the more I liked it. Like the first 45 minutes, I was kind of a little bored. Felt a little passive. But then the movie, it has like a twist, which is not really a twist. It's not really a twist, but it feels like it operates in the same way that completely kind of changes your perspective of what you've been watching in the situation. And I think it commits to it in a way that's just a lot of fun and and really silly, in a good way, in a way that like felt very retro horror movie. Like this is something that some obscure movie you would have found like from the late 70s and mid 80s, maybe that time period. And that's kind of like what James Wan is good at. He's good at approximating kind of styles of everything he's ever seen. He's like Tarantino. Not as good of a writer, though. I'll say that, right? His scripts are not very good. It's really just more about execution with James Wan, because his movies are just full of like the dumbest people on the planet. Which I suppose you could say is maybe an homage to a certain type of horror movie and stuff, but I don't know. You're a little eye rolly at times with James Wan movies, but he does that. He's kind of like, you understand like the visual language that he's working within because you've seen it before. He is a remix artist like that. So you intuitively, if you're film literate, or if you've watched a lot of movies, or even if you're just like really into horror movies, you have like a sense memory of why these things are effective. So when he pulls that stuff out, when he uses those tricks on you, you just kind of innately like go with it. It's something you recognize, and not in a bad way, in a way that's like very complimentary, and also does a lot of like have the heavy lifting for him in terms of like creating drama and tension. A lot of why his movies work, and it really hit me when I was watching *Malignant*, is because I'm just familiar with the kind of movies that he's pulling from. Like subconsciously, and not everybody goes into or recognize that consciously, but subconsciously it works on you, and that's why some of the scenes work as well as they do. It's because like I said, the scripts are often very weak. This one I wouldn't say is so much weak as it is just like shocking, I suppose, in a way. The characters are dumb as bricks though, and some of the casting, I gotta tell you. The two detectives are like the most boring actors ever. They're CW actors. CW we have here. They do the DC shows like The Flash and shit like that. Back in the day, they did like One Tree Hill and all that crap. Like that's the kind of caliber of actor they were, and it was like almost distracting how bad they were. I would say most of the cast is like this, because like it's, except for the lead actors, like I said at the beginning, but because the whole movie is kind of predicated on just the premise rather than good writing or interesting characters. Because I will say this, like, it's about the ride. The movie is about the ride. It is not about like it making sense or a nuanced, subtle story or character development. It's not like that at all. It is all premise. And thankfully, it's like 90 minutes long. It's the perfect length for something like this. If you're going to have something that's pure premise, you really shouldn't go over 90 minutes. And I think this movie, even having said that, almost wears out its welcome, but it decides to really go for it in the last act in a way that I appreciated. It reminded me a lot of, I had said Dead Silence before, but I would say Dead Silence and Insidious Chapter 2, or is it Part 2? Whatever, the second Insidious movie. Because the first one, which I think it's one of James Wan's better horror movies, is the first Insidious. And then the second one, he kind of changes it up and does like a weird poltergeist kind of riff, but in the rules and the the vibe of Poltergeist. It had more of that kind of Tobe Hooper vibe to it. And it was really goofy, but I kind of liked it because it was so goofy. And this one felt like that as well. And Dead Silence feels that way too. But yeah, like, I don't think it's going to be for everybody. Like, trust me, I think a lot of people are going to bounce pretty hard off it. They're not going to be able to get past how stupid it is, for lack of a better way to put it. But I think when you take it in its totality, like just the broad strokes, I think it's successful. Like, in terms of being an experience, like I said, a ride, it's pretty successful. much more so than a lot of horror movies that are like this that have come out over the years. And I think it is because he just pulls from the right things. Especially if you're a horror fan, you're just gonna recognize so many things. It's hard not to like have fun with that. Like spot the reference, spot the shot. Like a lot of people were saying, like, oh, it's like James Wan's Giallo film. And really why they said that is because he's clearly pulling a lot from like Dario Argento, Suspiria, Opera. There's a few other movies, like Argento movies, that he feels like he's calling from like specifically. Also, there's a lot of Brian De Palma in there. If you've seen the movie Sisters, that feels a lot like inspired by, an homage to, a rip off of a little bit. And then there's just a million other references to other filmmakers and stuff, but those seem like the ones that he's pulling from the hardest. So when people see like the crazy lighting schemes and stuff that look like Giallo movies, even though nothing in the movie itself is Giallo-like, it's just some of like the visual cues feel very pulled from that world, from that subgenre. But yeah, listen, I think it's worth watching. I think it's worth checking out. I don't think it's going to be well, you know what? I think it's probably going to be pretty divisive. I think either you're going to really like this movie or you're just going to not like hate it. You're just going to think it's really dumb. I'm kind of leaning towards really liking it. And it took me like a day. I had to sit with it for like a day. Because I watched it with my wife, and my wife thought it was the dumbest thing she'd ever fucking seen. And then I watched, but my takeaway at the end was like, I don't know. I was like, I really kind of like that it got stupid at the end. I really like that it got kind of crazy. And then I sat for a day, and I kind of saw the discourse that was happening on film Twitter and online. And I ended up just kind of enjoying it for what it was. You know? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. All right, I gotta go. Carline is a moving. All right, talk to you guys later.